Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Chives, Matthew Mugno, alongside Steve Murno. Today, we're here to debate about one thing and one thing only, the trade deadline coming up March 8th. Expecting some moves before then. Steve-O, it's time. It's that time of the year. Since as long as I can remember, the New York Rangers always make a splash, and we're ready for something no matter what it is this week.
I know. What makes it more interesting, Chives, is that this year is like very quiet. We don't know what's coming. Listen, I've been on the station. I'm on the wagon. I'm ready to take off. I think we're all ready for that push, but what does Drury have in store? I had this episode circled for the last few weeks, so I'm so excited. Let's do it, Chives. Let's talk some puck. This should be exciting.
All right, first topic. Big swing or no moves at all? What is it going to be?
You brought up this approach, and I didn't have this thinking beforehand. I always anticipated a move, and I quite frankly thought we needed a move. And I thought it was interesting to hear your take on it last week, but I can't see a no moves thing coming in here. I think it's very simple. I think the way our team is constructed right now, Chives, is that we are no doubt a playoff team. There's no doubt about it. However, I don't think we're a Stanley Cup champion team right now. Yes, we're great, and we could debate that. I want to hear your opinion in a second. But again, in the playoffs, it's going to come down against Florida, Carolina, Toronto. These are good teams. We saw, our last game with Toronto. We're going to see Florida just now. We need more depth. And I think there's certain things that you can't go wrong with adding. When you're on a 10-game win streak, Chives, there's not a lot to complain about. Igor's playing well, all is well. However, when things are not playing well, and we saw that in that month and a half streak, in December, early January, we saw what things could look like. And quite frankly, there are players that have not been playing well lately or not playing up to expectations. So listen, the trade deadline's here. I'm expecting a move, and I think we do need to make a move because teams with depth down the middle tend to go far. So jump in. Let's debate this.
Yeah, I think right. If I'm gonna prop my arm up and play GM, I'm gonna say lean into my theory of right now, no move. Right. I think smaller moves will help, like you said, depth moves. I do see the prospects of an addition that's bigger, a bona fide first line right winger. The reality is the assets you're willing to give up are Capo Caco, the first round pick, which there were rumors that Dolan was not willing to part with. Offman and Perreault are not on the board. So you're not dealing a player like the only player on the roster is Capo Caco that you're willing to deal. Maybe outside of Keandre Miller, which was a BR open ice like throw-in rumor. There was not a lot of credibility to that. No Offman, your number one 50-point potential national champion, slid to you in the draft prospect. And Brennan Offman, who's a Chris Drury guy, drafted him back in 21 with the 19th overall pick. Had an all right 3-game stint up. They're conditioning him at the American League level. So guess what? There's not a lot on the board. But if you're going to make, to me, a trade, and you're going to package Caco, and you're going to move the first, and you're going to move a second, it has to be for a bona fide guy. Right now there's already conversations about Alex Wennberg. It can't be Capo Caco for Alex Wennberg. And I'm hoping we get this up before anything happens, potentially in the next few days, knowing our luck, next few hours. But with that stated, Steve, part of that and why I wouldn't be willing to move a player like Caco, it has to be a big swing or a few depth pieces that really don't harm your future potential. Because listen, it's going to come down to a 34-year-old center and Frank Vetrano, a volume shooter, for a former second overall pick that's now playing well on your third line and doing things outside of contributing just through production. He hasn't produced a lot, 11.7 goals. But the reality is you would then be moving that player for a 3C veteran plug-in who hasn't seen the postseason in a decade, and Frank Vetrano, who we know fits well, but Pat Verbeek knows the price of that. He did not fly out to New York to watch a game at Madison Square Garden while his team was traveling to San Jose the next night just because he would, accept a second rounder and a third rounder and a prospect for that package. So the reality is, I think you avoid the teams that are going to try and price gauge a little bit, because the question, and I think this is the top of everything with a big swing or not moving at all, is what is this team? Are we a playoff team, Stanley Cup team? The end goal is the Stanley Cup. And I think if you want to get things going, it should be a big swing, only if you're willing to move those assets for a player that is going to contribute, not for a player that has one more year and then becomes a free agent and a 34-year-old center that could retire next year. Similar situation to Blake Wheeler, who you signed for $825K over the summer for free. So I should state, for moving no assets, Steve-O.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there, and I'm glad you could agree with me. I said on last week's episode we shouldn't trade Kako, and we shouldn't. I don't think there's any. Most of them will be rentals, minus a few. You bring up Vetrano. We're gonna bring up our players of who we think and good options to do in a second. But I think the Ducks are definitely a team that kind of you got to be wary of them, because they can drive the price up on you. And there's a couple teams. Seattle's an interesting one too. But I think before we jump into players, I think when you take a look at our current lineup right now, and you take Edstrom, right now in the fourth line, I think when it comes down to it, and it comes to play in the playoffs, particular Chives, you have to have people that could stop, a Marchand, a Pasternak, a Barkov, an Aho. We all know the Hurricanes are loaded. And the Eastern Conference is, quite frankly, I'll say it outright, it's a pain in the ass. No matter who we play, we're going to get a top team. And it's going to be a pain in the ass for this team. Leafs, we just saw with Austin Matthews, And then I'm not even, if you got, big long-term goals in a Stanley Cup, look out west. You got McKinnon, McDavid, Draisaitl. The Canucks are one of the best teams in the NHL this year, with JT Miller leading the way. So it's clear that we have to fortify ourselves in a couple of areas, and I'll jump right in. I think the areas for me, I mentioned them on last week's episode. I think we got to get a winger, and I think we need a third or fourth line depth center. For me, those are the two positions that I think the Rangers will look to add. And quite frankly, I think even a no move, a small move, is better than a no move, in my opinion.
I agree.
I think, and even if it's a small move for a third depth center, I still think that solidifies us pretty well, and I think those are the two areas that I think we need: a winger and a third or fourth line depth center. I'd argue, a lot of people saying winger. I'd argue the third or fourth line depth center is more important to this team right now.
All right. Well, we're going to get to that in a little bit, because one of the hot topics is about Mika Zibanejad, especially today. It's been all season. Now, with that, we brought up Frank Vetrano, 48 points, 29 goals. Henrique, 18 goals, 42 points in 60 games played this season. There are players that are viewed as safer picks, and there's a few that we could talk about that are definitely not on the draft board, and we've talked about on the show. Who's your safe pick?
Good question. I'm going to give you two answers. I'll give you my answer. I'll let you give yours, and then I'll come back to mine.
Yeah, I think Tommy Novak was the safe answer. I thought he was playing for a team that was still in the mix enough that you didn't have to trade futures heavily, right? To a Nashville Predators team, yeah, it seemed like they're tearing things down, but they're playing well right now. So they're going to look for futures, but they're not going to, expect listen, I know the Tanner Jeannot trade, right? But at the same time, I don't think Novak was fetching Kako a first and a second. That's the reality of it. I think Novak was going to be that guy. 32 thoughts today, which, granted, I know the NHL insiders are not close to the level. I don't think it's their fault. I think it has to do with front offices. We just mentioned Chris Drury doesn't let loose lips sink ships. But a lot of speculation, right? Like, we haven't heard anything really from anywhere about any player. It's always they think, they might. I thought it was a very good pointer to acknowledge Kevin Rooney and Colin Blackwell, former New York Rangers, on teams that are struggling right now, and you could get to nickel and dime. This team is surviving off nickel and diming because of their cap, like their salary cap and situation, and you have those top guys lined up. So I'm going to go with the safe pick is Tyler Johnson, Colin Blackwell, or Kevin Rooney straight up. They're not going to affect the cap. You're going to have to trade very little to just pick them up, the little knickknacks off the aisle. And I think it's a good opportunity to make moves for depth pieces while you're potentially looking for that bigger fish.
Interesting take there. Those were all names thrown around Ranger land here. Tommy Novak. I'll start off with your first pick. I think he has 75 points in 100 games, and he does come with an affordable cap hit, which is friendly for us. I'm not sure if the Predators are gonna decide to sell though. I'm not sold. They've turned some things around lately.
Well, yeah, I mean, Novak signed a deal today, so he's off the board.
He did. I didn't even see that.
I think it was literally, Steve-O, it was like 20 minutes ago. So I feel, I mean, this news comes flying, right? I think it was like a 3x3.5. So listen, I don't think it's not tradable, though. I think that's something that many people counted out. I think you still got to keep your foot in that door based on what he brings to the table. But I want to know, I mean, in your opinion, what are you thinking on Novak? But, what do you think is your safe pick?
Look at that. You live and you learn. Live news here on the show. Novak off the table. I didn't think he was going to be an option anyway. Listen, I turn to the Sharks as a safe pick, and I'm going to go with a name that a lot of people are not really talking about. How about Nico Sturm on the Sharks? He's been playing well as of late. He won a Stanley Cup with Colorado, so I think he's got that experience. He's very good in a bottom six role. He helped Colorado win that Stanley Cup. He's very strong defensively. He's got a good work ethic, and also he's got another year on his deal, which I think is key. I think in order for the Rangers to maximize what they get in this trade, I think getting a player that's has another year left on the deal, it makes it more friendly. With the Rangers cap situation, in terms of you don't have to make that many adjustments in the off season. Obviously, if the price comes right, for me, he's a fast, cheap pluck. Sharks are not going to look to get any major haul for him. So for me, he's a safe pick that, quite frankly, a lot of people are not throwing out there.
Question: Vladimir Tarasenko, is he a safe pick to you, or is he a risky move?
There's a fan in me, and then there's an analyzer in me, that analyzes things from like as a broadcaster.
Objective.
Yes. For me, I'd love him, but I say no. I don't think he's a safe pick. I don't think the Senators would deal him out. I think Tarasenko, honestly, Chives, I think Tarasenko is a better fit on other teams than our team. I think, teams like Vegas that have got a lot of injuries, I think Tarasenko could fit better on other teams. And I think Ottawa, if they are willing to deal him, I think they're going to turn to a team that's going to offer more. And I'm not sure that the Rangers can have the best offer for him. I'm curious, you agree with me?
I disagree, and where I disagree is I think where it's a safe pick is exactly what you're getting. His game is not slowed down in Ottawa. He's still a key contributor. He can still play the flank of Zibanejad and Kreider, which, again, that's just like a steam train coming down the tracks right now with this conversation, because the one right wing is an important part of the construction of this roster. We heard Greg Wyshynski last week when he came on the show talk about speed. The other aspect that this team needs is some 5-on-5 scoring. I think where Tarasenko is a safe pickup is if you have Stanley Cup dreams, this is a guy that's not only won a cup, he's still scoring at the same clip, still has a nasty wrister, plays well off the puck, and he can slot into that first line. So, Steve-O, yeah, I do think that he is a safe move in that respect. In the same way I mentioned before, Rooney, Blackwell, Tarasenko, they've played with the club. They've played with these core players before. I don't think it really is much of a risk. And it's a little bit different than one of the riskiest things I've seen, which I know the Devils would not part with Toffoli and send him to New York. 4.125 cap hit, I believe. There were some, not rumblings, but conversation online today about Toffoli being an option for the Rangers. That to me is not a safe bet solely because the organization wouldn't be willing to part ways with him, right? The Devils aren't making a trade like that with the Rangers. With that stated, though, Tarasenko in Ottawa, I don't see a reason why the Senators don't give him up, especially they're now in the bottom of the standings. They expected to be in a better spot this year. I thought they would be in a better spot this year. You thought they were going to be in a little bit of a better spot this year. So at the end of the day, I'm going to go with he's a safe pick.
Now let me ask you this: when you say safe pick, do you mean are you? I know what you mean, like in terms of the lineup and stuff, but are you considering what you are giving up in order to get that?
Yeah, I think it's a subjective term, right? But I think overall it's what you're giving up, the organization you're dealing with. You know, we just talked about you would not like to see Capo Caco in a deal swap like that. Neither would I. I think he brings too much to the table. If we're talking about safe as a term, I think it's overall, you know what you're getting. You have some leverage in the conversations, which I don't think the team has that much with Anaheim. With which also Trevor Zegras' name has come up, like that seems very like a wild area of conversation and risk. And I think the third thing is also the player you're getting. Like, are they bona fide? Because I think even that term, like, are they going to deliver? And we don't know 100%, but I know the players that have come to New York and thrived are capable of doing it again because of the position they were put in. Frank Vetrano was on that first line. Vladimir Tarasenko was on that first line. Kevin Rooney was the depth center. These are guys. Colin Blackwell played with Artemi on Panarin's wing. These are guys I think are safe picks in that respect. So you could go a few different ways with it, right? And I think I hit kind of most of those areas along with the players that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I see. I definitely, based on your reasoning, I'd throw Tarasenko in as a safe pick. Why not? I'd listen. I got his shirt. I'd whip that out. I would love that. But of course, then if you're going, of course, that boat, then you got to throw Frankie Vetrano in there as well. You know, as a safe pick. Now, I would put him more on the lesser spectrum of a safe pick, only because I think his haul is going to be a lot more maybe than a Tarasenko.
Yeah.
I think we just mentioned the Ducks, what they're trying to give up. But listen, I think if I had to give you a number one candidate, honestly, I'd point to Vetrano. He's had
he is probably number one, right on the board.
I'd tell you, Vetrano's my number one Chives, and here's why.
I'm wary of what Verbeek wants for him, though, right? I think it's like chicken and egg. It's a cyclical conversation.
Yeah, I would say so, but I'm willing to part with a first round pick. Maybe not this year, maybe next year. I don't anticipate us picking high in the first place.
I would move that pick, like the miners going out to California for gold right now. I would be hustling, man. I think the rumors that they're going to keep this pick, I think, are just only hindering their trade conversations. And I hope it's not true. We're only going to find out this week, sadly, because if the reality is that this is for the Vegas sphere, I think it's just shooting yourself in the foot. You just had a player slide to you at the 23rd pick, and he's looking like the steal of the draft. Why do you need to keep on to that pick? You're not anticipating being a first or second round exit. That's the reality. Are they a Stanley Cup team? That's a question that can't be answered just through these trades. But if you make the right moves, we can know for sure. So not moving that first pick, Steve-O, I think is damaging the team tenfold. Tenfold. I don't know if it's worse than moving Kako, though, because I think the other thing with Vetrano, too, that makes it a little unsafe is, well, you plug the first line right wing. Now you need another third line right wing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
now you probably got to move at least a second, at least a prospect. You got to move something for a third line right wing, right? At least to contend with.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. And you look, I tend to believe these. I don't think he wants to give up this year's first round pick. But listen, I'm not saying it's got to be this year. I give up next year. I'm totally okay with giving up next year's. And here's the thing: if we're gonna turn to the Ducks, there's tons of other teams we could turn to, But if we're gonna turn to the Ducks and we're gonna get Vetrano, then if you're gonna give up that first round pick, you might as well go and get Henrique as well. Vetrano checks a lot of boxes off. He's a safe bet in my opinion. He's had success here, but not only that, but he's going to help drive that Kreider and Mika line. He's done it once. He could do it again. That's a big thing that I think we need to get going. It's the beginning of March. I should put my Mika jersey up behind me, but we need Mika March. I said it in last week's episode, and we both agree we need Mika March now, the more than ever. Listen, we've got a small sample size of Mika up to this point. I mean, this better be one hell of a March for him. I mean, I'm waiting for a Mika spectacle as of right now, but we need that piece that's going to come in on that top line and get Kreider and Mika going. And Vetrano is that piece in my book.
All right, well, listen, we're talking about Mika now. Let's dive right in. I've been itching all day to talk about this. Listen, Kakko's at 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points in 40 games. Caught some slack from Brooks on the latest New York Post piece about, really not contributing a lot in Toronto. How many times, honestly, I go back and forth on the fence with this. How many times do you give him the opportunity, former second overall pick, does well as a third line player? Likely that might be his ceiling because there's no room really on that second line right now. Lafreniere sees that role. You opened up and moved Buchnevich a number of seasons ago now, so Kakko and Lafreniere could fill out that top 6. Kakko's now playing on the third line. With all of that stated, where my issue is with Mika Zibanejad and how do you get him going, I don't think it's worth trading hefty assets in order to get a player going that could turn this around in a week, could turn around in 2 weeks. The other side of that conversation, right? Grass is always greener. Actually, grass is really browner in this situation, is like he doesn't. And with that, I don't think still it's worth moving other pieces around to get Zibanejad, to get Kreider going. It's been all year where they're producing all right, but 5-on-5, he only has 8 even strength goals, 28 even strength points, 19 goals, 54 points on the year, pace for 73 points. I think that's either his 4th or 5th lowest total as a Ranger in his tenure as a Ranger. And he just signed that mega deal for 8.5. Argue with Johnny online about it today. Like, I know he's not Sidney Crosby, but no one looked at Brian Rust or Connor Sheary and was like, they got to get Sid going. And I know Mika Zibanejad 93 is not 87 by any means, but he's your top line center. And I do not think it's worth trading assets like Kakko, in that respect, to gain a right winger, unless it's like term. We know what they're getting. The age is a factor. It has to be a near perfect situation for me. I want to hear from you. This is a player that had 81 points in 21-22 and 91 in 22-23.
100% agree with that. 100%. You mentioned the Penguins. Penguins didn't need that, and also, I don't know, you could call this devil's advocate if you want, but, there really isn't somebody on our team, up and down, and all the people we've moved up to the first line, nobody's really gotten Mika going at all this season, consistently. There's spurts of where we go, oh, Mika's coming in the next game. It's like, what the hell? So yes, I think if we are going to turn to the Ducks, I'm okay with giving that pick. I think, listen, you're going to turn to the Ducks, you might as well go all in and try and get Henrique and Vetrano. Henrique, I don't think is going to be all that expensive. We know he's good character. You mentioned a good point, though, a lot of people don't mention, though, is that he hasn't played in a playoff game, in like, I think 11 or 12 years. I mean, Chives, I think we were in 5th grade the last time he was in the playoffs.
Yeah, actually, he went to the conference final, right? Was a dog, like depth guy. Scores, obviously, we know. And put up numbers that postseason run, Stanley Cup final run, 2012. 12 years ago by, this May. With that, he plays again in 2000, I believe it was 18, and is swept by the Flames. So, if he recorded a point, he recorded a point or two. But I don't think he even scored a goal in that series. So I think the reality is this is a player that, listen, at 34, you don't know exactly what you're getting. And I know it's like he's performing well this year. I think he's performed well. I just don't think, Kakko a prospect, which, by the way, they're not willing to part with Hoffman or Perreault. Granted, those are extremely valuable pieces. But even, I question, do you trade a Brett Berard who's performing really well at the AHL level? I would argue against that. I would.
Yeah, I agree with you. No Kako, no Parole, no none of these guys. I really do think, Henrique, again, he's gonna be a UFA. I'm gonna want to get a big haul for Vetrano. But I think a first round pick, maybe it's next year's first round pick, a lower tier prospect that's not one of our big ones, and maybe a later pick in the draft. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's sufficient enough for Henrique, who is going to be a free agent, and Vetrano.
Reality is I don't. I think the team three places up in the bottom of the standings. I don't think this year has gone exactly as they'd hoped in terms of the step they're going to take to progress. And I think what they want is they want something that's going to be a future asset. This is not a teardown. They tore it down. So when the Rangers made trades like Grabner, for the context of this conversation and the sphere that we're comfortable in speaking in, Grabner was traded for, what was it, Riker, something, Igor Rykov, right, with the Devils, because they just had to trade these assets. It was like, all right, Michael Grabner, what can we fetch for him that's of the highest value? Rick Nash was a big piece. Ryan McDonough was a big piece, but it was mostly tear down. That was that mindset, specific situation, I know. I don't think the Ducks are looking at that. I think they know they have the leverage. You want our pieces, then deal with us. You're dealing with us, right? They're 3 places from the bottom of the standings. They'll likely have a top pick in the draft again. They want futures, and I think that comes into play as Kako, a prospect, a first. And you're getting 2 assets back. So I do think they're obviously valuable, and I'm not undervaluing that either. Like, I just don't think like a second rounder and, like I mentioned, a Brett Berard are just going to get the job done with a deal like that. But, Steve, I want to rein us back. 93. The big thing about 9-3 for me is, why does your number one center need to get going, right? We've talked about this all year. Oh, Blake Wheeler didn't really fit up there, and Kako didn't fit up there. Granted, we're not talking about players that might have to play to their ceiling to achieve that. But at the same time, why is this a conversation? We don't think Chris Kreider is a great skater, net front power play guy, right? We talk about all those things. He can skate in straight lines, has the speed. We know he can score. Like he's at the 30 goal mark again. I just don't really understand why those two need. That is what has gone around the media. A player to juice them up. Like, you guys are the guys. That's the thesis of the year, is Panarin and Lafreniere needed to get going. They did. Vincent Trocheck's been arguably the MVP of the year, right? Igor in his slump, he can only rely on himself to get him out of that. Fox, Trouba, Miller, whenever they go on slumps, it's like you never really look towards Lindgren when Fox is struggling, right? It's like, listen, they're playing their own game. And I think, to me, as team sport as this is, and listen, this is a team sport that's constructed, your line mates can affect you. I don't think this is that situation. Zibanejad's still playing well on the power play. He's not playing well 5-on-5. He has a winger he's comfortable with. They've had 16 different players play on their wing. That did not affect last season, 91 points. So I don't understand why the conversation is that he needs to be juiced up.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think the narrative in the media, I don't know who's juicing this up, but I disagree with it, quite frankly. And again, there's a lot of things you could point to, but I want to harp in on the recipe of success, you want to call it, or not even success, but what the other teams in the league, the top dogs, the Floridas, the Carolinas, what they got. Sebastian Aho, he's got his complement piece. Barkov's got his complement piece on the wing. You look at what we have. We just have Kreider and Zibanejad on that first line. You look at who the option pieces. We've slotted so many different guys in that slot, and none of them have seemed to stick out. I don't think Zibanejad's an issue on the power play. I mean, to me, that's one of our biggest strengths. For me, it's even strength that we've struggled at points of the season to get going. So not necessarily. I'm not going to sit here and rabble all the guys that we've put on that first line, and the listeners know too, who's been playing with Zibanejad throughout the course of the season. But it comes to a time where you point to Zibanejad and it's on him now. He's not producing at certain points. He's not producing up to expectation. I would say on 5-on-5 play at even strength. And you say, not one person is going to do it. You know what I mean? I still think he's going to wake up. We've seen this time and time and again from Mika throughout these last couple of years. You mentioned last year how he was able to finish. I think he's going to be okay, and I'd be blown out of this world shocked if we're sitting here in the playoffs and Mika has not uh, been able to accumulate something or pick this up. I think he will. But again, there is room for concern, and that's why I think jury is evaluating everything.
I'm not dragging my feet on this. I disagree. I think I think to see a player go from 81 and 91 points to, on pace for 73, granted, it's not about numbers necessarily. He's a producer. That's what we're accustomed to seeing. And I think at the end of the day, this is a situation where injuries were not a part of this, right? Like, there's very limited things you could point to. This isn't a situation where Chris Kreider was injured all season. And I do understand. I see the other side. I see the other side 100%. We saw with Artemi Panarin, right, the last 2 years. Part of that is management playing a role in that. But to me, last season, Panarin was frustrating because management did address that, right? They brought in Kane and Tarasenko at the deadline. Panarin didn't mesh with any of them. Granted, you could also talk about which level is it? Is it the management, the coaching, the player surrounding that, skater specifically? I see the side of it where it has to be on the management to bring in a player to complement your first line, right? Like, if you're going to bring in a guy, bring in a guy. We bargain bin. Blake Wheeler didn't really work out. He then got injured. I think what Laviolette's doing, personally, is I think the coaching staff is trying anyone up there. And I don't think making any waves, but I think they're trying to prove right now, like when Jimmy Vesey's been up there, in during a game. Like, I'm surprised Rempe hasn't been up there. I think they're trying to state like not a lot's working up there no matter what we're trying. And this is coming upon deadline time. So I think the 93 thing, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens, because there's either going to be an answer this week, no matter what happens. If they don't really bring in like a bona fide guy, a top dog for that first line, they're going to be rotating those guys, and you're going to know what the answer is from the management no matter what. And I do think they're going to bring someone in, just based on the last few years. I don't think Chris Drury's sitting there. He's playing 3D chess, if anything. Steve-O, with that, we haven't talked about the most fun topic. We're going to leave it for last here. Who is your off-the-board pick? Who's the guy no one's talking about? Who's the guy, contract might fit? Who's the guy might be Steve-O's guy?
When you say off the board pick, are you meaning if I had to pick anyone, like anybody, like, or realistically? Okay, I was gonna say obviously I was gonna pick Jake Gensel. Obviously, if I had to pick anybody, but that's not a realistic option. It's not.
Listen, crazier things have happened.
That's true. I mean, I'd jump out the window if the alert came in and Jay Gensel was acquired. But listen, man, the Penguins are a conversation for another day. Who the hell knows what they're doing? I'm gonna turn to a team that we have two options. I do like. I'm not gonna go with him because you mentioned him, Tyler Johnson from Chicago. I'm not gonna pick him, but he's definitely somebody that I could see, the Rangers turning to. Obviously, I think the cap friendly is one reason why. And I think the Blackhawks would be willing to retain some of his salary. He's an intriguing option. He could play center, he could play wing. We can move him around. He's got, I think, well over 100 playoff games played. But I think, he might be a reliability in the sense of injury. So I'm not going to pick him, even though he's enticing. I'm going to turn to Seattle, Chives. Again, Seattle was such an interesting team for me because there's a couple pieces that we can nick there, and just, they're trying to establish themselves in the league this year. I mean, you called it. I haven't heard anybody saying this year your prediction was right, with Seattle falling off. So they are such a weird team for me. There's a lot of names we could pluck on there.
Really weird.
You mentioned Wenberg on there. Jordan
He's
Eberle.
Steve. I'm telling you, by the time we release this, he could be traded to New York or Colorado. That's a word on the street right now. He's sitting out tonight's game. By the time this comes, I mean, I'm trying to get this up ASAP, but yeah, he's a name, and I know there's two more we've talked about.
You're making me smile here. I'm ready for a move, Chives. I'm ready for a move. But Jordan Eberle, I think he's had big playoff moments in the past. Obviously everything comes with roadblocks, but I really do think that the Seattle Kraken, they're not making the playoffs. I really do think that we should look to a team like Seattle, and there's a big pool in there of guys.
I respect that. But where I disagree and where I've started to come along the lines of disagreeing is with Seattle, right? Yes, I predicted the fall off. Okay. Little sophomore slump tech. But at the end of the day, I think Eberle, he was criticized heavily for his finishing and his ability to finish as an Islander. I think he revitalized things with Seattle last season. He came up with that big moment against Colorado. But other than that, I think if you harp on those moments, outside of it, I don't know what he brings to the table as a first line right wing. And that's where I disagree with the off the board pick for you because just, I don't know. I think a guy that, like, if you're going to bring in a volume shooter, that's where Vetrano is a little more understandable. Like, if you do painfully give up futures for Vetrano, at least you know he's shooting the dang thing. Eberle gives me a little bit of that Eric Stahl vibe, like was a top pick at one time, is really getting older, came from a team that was struggling a little bit. I don't know. I not the right vibe for me.
Are you about to give yours?
Oh, listen,
Can I guess the
you
team?
counter.
Can
Yeah,
I guess
you know
the
who it
team?
is.
Is it the Sharks?
Oh, no.
No. Oh,
No,
okay.
I don't think Logan Couture stated the other day. That's who I was thinking too. But he did state the other day that, oh, are we also talking Dallas Stars? If I could go off the board, it's Joe Pavelski. I would give up my kidney for him. Um, but no, I think it's Yanni Gord. Come on, I've been saying it for probably a season now. 5.1 cap hit next 2 seasons, 7 goals, 22 points. But we can't say enough the guy's work ethic. And to me, if you want a guy that could slide up and down the roster, I could see him being the guy that digs some pucks up for Mika and Kreider and a guy that could play in that depth position. So I do like that. Maybe, listen, he's a grinder. I love his mentality. He's a dog. But yeah, that's my off the board pick. I know we stated this, I think, exactly a month ago, but I'm still digging in. If I'm going to go outlandish, it's Joe Pavelski. But the Stars are not going to, part ways with him.
I was gonna ask you for shits and giggles. What was your one absurd pick? Interesting.
I'm seeing some crazy stuff fly. Biz said he was like, listen, if Pittsburgh's going to tear it down, send Sid to Colorado, like some crazy. Listen, there's a difference between, a statement like that, but there's some legit stuff that's starting to move around. Like I said, Wenberg's sitting out right now tonight's game. By the time this comes out, I'm sure, we'll get the notification that he was traded. So
we'll see. We'll see. I listen. I had a similar thinking. I really do think Seattle will end up being the team that we pick from. Even though I had a pick, I would pick from the Ducks. I would really pick from the Ducks. But again, I really do think that Seattle is the one team. Listen, it could be the fun about this is speculation. This is smart speculation. But it could be a team like we could pick from somebody that we haven't even mentioned.
yeah.
That's what's best about Jury. You don't know what's coming.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that, like you just said, you never know. I think last year was a little more obvious. And there were also bigger pieces. Listen, the last few years have been incredible trade deadlines. I mean, we've seen big names move, brand names move. This year is more of like, hey, can you get a piece that's going to overachieve a little? Because I don't think the names out there right now, you have such a disparity. The top of the league, it's the first time in, I think, like 2 decades that the top teams in the league are only separated by 3 points. So it's a phenomenal year in terms of, the best teams truly being really good. And for the President's Trophy race, and then, teams at the bottom that are just terrible. I mean, tore it down and they're expecting top picks. So with that, it makes for an interesting trade market. You don't have a lot out there. And, we're talking about Alex Wemberg like he's a top trade option and Tommy Novak. Granted, respect that, respect their game, respect their hustle, their jobs. But we're not talking, a few years back, it was Taylor Hall, and last year, Kane Tarasenko. There have been names flying the last few years. So definitely a different year. And listen, no matter what happens, we're going to be here to break down post-trade deadline what the Rangers did or didn't do.
Key word in there is didn't do. I think we'd be totally shocked if nothing gets done. But all right, that's gonna wrap us up here in this episode of Puck Talk CS. Who's it gonna be? Feel free to let us know on our Instagram at Puck Talk CS or down below in the comments. Less than 4 days away from the trade deadline, and you could have an emergency episode at any point, depending on what this move, if any moves, will be this week. All that remains to be seen. We'll see you on the end. Always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.